Have you ever stopped to think about why, even with so many options for pleasure and entertainment, we feel increasingly empty and controlled? In 1932, Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World and showed something that seemed impossible: a society where people were slaves, but loved their slavery. What did Huxley see back then that we still can't see today? The answer is right in front of us. While we think we're free because we can choose between 1,000 types of entertainment, 1,000 forms of instant pleasure, we're actually being controlled in a much more subtle way than anything from the past. Could it be that pleasure has become our golden prison? To understand how we got here, we first need to understand what pleasure is. From a scientific standpoint, pleasure is our brain's response to stimuli it considers beneficial for our survival. When we do something our brain interprets as good for us, it releases chemical substances called neurotransmitters, especially dopamine, which create the sensation we call pleasure. There are basically two types of pleasure that scientists have identified. The first is hedonic pleasure, which comes from experiences that make us feel good in the moment: eating something tasty, watching a funny video, receiving a compliment. It's immediate, intense, but also temporary. The second is eudaimonic pleasure, which comes from activities that give meaning to our lives, helping other people, developing our talents, building deep relationships. This type of pleasure is less intense in the moment, but lasts much longer and leaves us genuinely satisfied. The problem with modern society is that we've become addicted to hedonic pleasure and forgotten about the eudaimonic kind. It's as if we were programmed to always seek the next dose of dopamine instead of building a life that truly satisfies us. And this programming isn't accidental. It's very profitable for those who know how to exploit it. Aldous Huxley wasn't just any writer when he created his most famous work. Born in 1894 into a family of English intellectuals, he grew up watching the world go through massive changes. His grandfather was Thomas Huxley, a famous biologist who defended Darwin's theories. His brother Julian became an important scientist. Aldous grew up in a house where science, philosophy, and literature naturally mixed together. Huxley lived through the First World War, saw the rise of mass production, cinema, and radio. He observed how people began behaving differently with these new technologies. He realized that these inventions weren't neutral. They changed the way people thought and related to each other. When Huxley wrote Brave New World, the world was between two world wars. People had just come out of a terrible economic crisis and were beginning to dream of a better future through technology. Henry Ford was revolutionizing car production with the assembly line. Talking pictures were being born. Radio was connecting people on different continents. Everyone believed that technology would solve all human problems. But Huxley saw something different. He perceived that these same technologies that promised to free us could also enslave us in very subtle ways. In his book, he imagined a future society where there was no war, hunger, or disease. It seemed perfect, but there was a price. People had lost their humanity. In the world he created, people were literally manufactured in laboratories. They weren't born naturally, but were produced like products in a factory. From the moment they were created, they were conditioned to accept their place in society. The alphas were intelligent and commanded everything. The betas helped the alphas. The gammas, deltas, and epsilons did the heavy work. Each person was programmed from childhood to love their social position and never question anything. The most impressive thing in Huxley's book is that people weren't forced to accept this system. They genuinely loved their situation. The deltas didn't envy the alphas. They had been conditioned to feel happy being deltas. It was a world where everyone was satisfied with their limited lives. And when someone started to feel uncomfortable about something, there was always soma to make that feeling disappear. Soma was a perfect drug. It gave pleasure without side effects, calmed the mind without harming the body, was safe and addictive in just the right measure. People took soma and all their problems, doubts, and questions simply disappeared. Curiously, and almost prophetically, Huxley named his fictional drug soma, a name that, years later, would be used in the real world for a medication, carisoprodol. Although the real drug is a muscle relaxant prescribed for pain, and not the universal happiness pill imagined by Huxley. The nominal coincidence serves as an intriguing reminder of how his fiction remains relevant. But Huxley's genius was in predicting something much more subtle than a pill. Imagine a drug that doesn't need to be injected, swallowed, or smoked. A substance that enters through your eyes and ears, that attacks your brain directly and leaves you addicted without you realizing it. Today, our society has created something very similar to Soma, but without needing pills. Our smartphones, social networks, and video platforms function like a digital version of Soma. Each notification is a small dose of pleasure. Each like, each comment, each new video releases a small amount of dopamine in our brain. We become addicted to this sensation, but we don't realize that, little by little, we lose our ability to be alone with our thoughts. The science behind this is fascinating and scary at the same time. Our brain has a system called the reward circuit that evolved to help us survive. When we do something that increases our chances of survival, like finding food, finding a partner, or escaping from danger, this circuit releases dopamine, which makes us feel good. The problem is that this system evolved at a time when it was hard to find pleasure. Food was scarce, entertainment was rare, stimuli were limited. Our brain wasn't prepared for a world where we can have instant pleasure 24 hours a day. It's like giving candy non-stop to a child. Eventually, she'll get sick. Technology companies have discovered how to exploit this system very precisely. They hire neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, addiction specialists. The goal is to create products that are as addictive as possible without seeming like they're addictive. It's a science of addiction disguised as convenience and entertainment. The algorithms study our behavior with a precision that would be the envy of any psychologist. They know when we're most vulnerable, when we're most likely to click, when we're most susceptible to influence. Then they offer us exactly what they know we'll want at the right time, in the right way. But it would be unfair to say that all technology is bad. The internet has also brought wonderful things to our lives. We can learn anything we want, for free, in the comfort of our homes. We can connect with people from all over the world who share our interests. We can access art, music, literature that was previously only available to a small elite. Educational videos have democratized knowledge in an unprecedented way in history. Today, a person in a small town can watch the best physics classes in the world, learn languages with native speakers, develop skills that would previously require years of formal study. This is genuinely revolutionary and positive. Digital platforms have also allowed independent artists to share their work without needing major record labels or publishers. Musicians, writers, filmmakers, visual artists can find their audience directly. This has created much greater cultural diversity than existed in the era of traditional media. The question isn't whether technology is good or bad. The question is how we use it. The problem arises when we lose conscious control over our digital consumption. When instead of choosing what we want to watch, the algorithms choose for us. When instead of using technology as a tool, it starts using us as a product. This leads us to a strange situation. We live in an era where being happy has become a social obligation. If you're sad, depressed, or simply thoughtful, people immediately ask, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you happy?" Society teaches us that we need to always be well, always positive, always consuming pleasure. But Huxley knew that sadness, melancholy, and even suffering are important parts of human life. Actually, there's scientific evidence that negative emotions are essential for our psychological development. Sadness helps us process losses and changes. Anxiety alerts us to real dangers. Anger motivates us to change unjust situations. When we try to eliminate all these emotions with constant distractions or chemical substances, we lose important information about our inner life. When we constantly flee from any emotional discomfort, we lose the opportunity to grow. It's like a muscle that's never exercised. It gets weak. Our ability to deal with problems, to reflect on our life, to question the world around us keeps diminishing. We become like eternal children, always expecting someone to entertain us, always waiting for the next dose of pleasure. This infantilization is very convenient for those who want to control us. Children don't question complex systems, don't ask difficult questions about power and injustice, don't demand profound changes in society. They just want to play and have fun. When an entire society thinks like children, it becomes very easy to manipulate that society. Just offer new toys, new games, new forms of entertainment. Huxley realized that entertainment could be a very powerful weapon. Not a weapon that hurts the body, but one that dominates the mind. When we're always entertained, we don't have time to think about important things. We don't question why our life is the way it is. We don't ask who's really making the decisions that affect our future. Decades after Huxley, another English writer named George Orwell wrote 1984, a book that also talked about social control, but in a completely different way. Orwell imagined a society controlled by pain, fear, constant surveillance. People obeyed because they were afraid of being punished. It was the complete opposite of Huxley's world. Orwell grew up in a different era than Huxley. He lived through the rise of fascism in Europe, fought in the Spanish Civil War, saw up close how totalitarian governments used force to control their populations. That's why, when he imagined the future, he saw a world dominated by terror. In 1984, Orwell showed a government called Big Brother that controlled people through absolute fear. Cameras everywhere, thought police that could read your ideas, torture for those who disobeyed. People lived in constant terror, never knowing when they might be arrested for crimes they didn't even know they had committed. Huxley showed a government that controlled people through absolute pleasure, constant entertainment, legalized drugs, free intimacy. People lived in constant ecstasy, never questioning anything because they were always too happy to care. Two different paths to the same destination, the loss of human freedom. For a long time, people thought Orwell was right about the future. After all, we lived through decades of Cold War, where governments really did spy on their citizens and used fear as a tool of control. But today we realize that Huxley may have been more accurate. We're controlled more by what gives us pleasure than by what gives us fear. In the 1980s, an American professor named Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Postman took the ideas of Huxley and Orwell and showed how they applied to television and modern media. He said we were being controlled not by force or fear, but by constant entertainment. Postman grew up in the golden age of American television. He saw how this new medium completely changed the way people received information. Before television, when someone wanted to know about politics, they read newspapers or long, detailed books. This required concentration, patience, the ability to think about abstract concepts. With television, everything became spectacle. Politics became entertainment. News became show business. Education became fun. Postman realized that this wasn't just a change in the way of communicating. It was a fundamental change in how people processed information and thought about the world. According to Postman, when all information needs to be entertaining to hold our attention, we lose the ability to deal with serious and complex information. Important subjects are simplified until they become jokes or catchphrases. Issues that require deep reflection are reduced to 30-second sound bites. What's most interesting is that this happens even when we watch educational content. Even serious programs about science or history need to be packaged in an entertaining way to maintain our attention. This isn't necessarily bad, but it creates an expectation that all knowledge should come accompanied by entertainment. Constant entertainment also destroys our capacity for contemplation. To contemplate means to look at something with total attention, to think deeply about it without hurry. Our ancestors spent hours looking at the sky, at nature, reflecting on life, on their place in the universe. Today, if we go 5 minutes without external stimulus, we already feel discomfort and run to our phones. We've lost the ability to be alone with ourselves. And this is a serious problem because it's during these moments of silence and solitude that we have our best ideas, that we connect information in new ways, that we truly understand what we want from life. This loss of contemplation is serious because it's during these moments of quietude that our mind can process experiences deeply. It's when we're in silence that we can hear our intuition, our inner wisdom. It's in solitude that we discover who we really are, not who social media or society says we should be. Huxley knew this because he himself practiced meditation and other forms of spiritual contemplation. He studied Eastern philosophies, especially Buddhism and Hinduism. He learned that ancient traditions had developed sophisticated methods to calm the mind and see beyond life's superficial distractions. These practices helped him see the dangers of a society addicted to constant stimuli. In Buddhist tradition, there's a concept called monkey mind, which describes how our mind constantly jumps from thought to thought, like a monkey jumping from branch to branch. Digital technologies enormously amplify this natural tendency. Instead of training our mind to calm down and concentrate, we feed it with infinite distractions. But the current economic system depends on us never being truly satisfied. If we were genuinely happy with what we have, we'd stop buying new things. That's why we're constantly bombarded with messages saying we need more products, more services, more experiences to be truly happy. The pleasure of consumption becomes an infinite and frustrating cycle. We buy something hoping it will bring us lasting satisfaction. We feel pleasure for a while. Then that pleasure passes and we need to buy more things. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket. No matter how much we put in, it always leaks out. This cycle makes us unconscious slaves to a system that profits from our perpetual dissatisfaction. We work to have money to buy things that give us temporary pleasure, but soon we need to work more to buy more things. We get trapped in a wheel that never stops. And the worst part is that we sincerely believe this is freedom, because we can choose between different brands and products. In Huxley's book, there was a character named John who came from a reservation where people still lived in a primitive way, that is, naturally. When John arrived in civilized society and saw how people lived, he was genuinely horrified. For him, those people weren't free. They were slaves who didn't even know they were slaves. They had traded their soul, their ability to feel deeply, for comfort and instant pleasure. John represented what we've all lost, the ability to feel intensely, to suffer when necessary, to question the world around us, to seek meaning instead of just pleasure. He was seen as strange and problematic by the perfect society precisely because he was still completely human. The truth is that our choices are much more limited than we like to think. Our attention is constantly being fragmented among thousands of different stimuli. We receive thousands of pieces of information per day through notifications, advertisements, videos, posts, but we can't process any of them in a truly deep way. It's like trying to drink water from a fire hose. Most of it gets lost along the way, and in the end, we're still thirsty. We consume enormous amounts of information, but we don't absorb almost any of it in a meaningful way. We become mentally exhausted without having really learned or grown. This fragmentation of attention destroys our capacity for deep thought and emotional connection. We can no longer read an entire book without picking up our phone several times. We can't have a long, deep conversation without getting distracted by some device. Our brain gets used to quick and constant stimuli and loses the ability to concentrate on one thing for very long. Scientific studies show that this constant switching of focus between different stimuli, what researchers call multitasking, actually decreases our mental efficiency. Our brain spends extra energy whenever it needs to alternate between different tasks. It's like driving a car constantly stopping and accelerating instead of maintaining constant speed. You use much more fuel. Postman called this the death of intellectual childhood. He wasn't talking about children literally dying, but about the disappearance of the idea that there's knowledge appropriate for different ages and levels of maturity. Through television and later the internet, children were exposed to the same content as adults without gradual preparation or adequate context. This created adults who continued thinking emotionally like teenagers, but also children who lost the ability to develop patience and depth gradually. The result was an entire society functioning at the emotional level of immature people, wanting immediate gratification, avoiding responsibility, always seeking fun instead of growth. This profoundly affects even our most intimate relationships. Real intimacy, whether in friendships or romantic relationships, requires time, patience, emotional vulnerability. It requires the ability to tolerate discomfort, to work through conflicts, to invest in another person, even when we don't receive immediate gratification in return. But when we're addicted to instant pleasure, these qualities become extremely difficult to develop and maintain. We prefer superficial relationships that give us quick and easy pleasure to deep relationships that require real effort and long-term commitment. Sexuality itself has been transformed into yet another consumer product. Instead of being a form of deep and vulnerable connection between people, it became another source of instant stimulation. In Huxley's world, children were taught from very early on that physical intimacy was just mechanical fun, without any deeper emotional or spiritual meaning. Today, we live something very similar. This doesn't mean that physical pleasure is intrinsically bad, but when it becomes the only important dimension of intimacy, we lose the emotional, psychological, and even spiritual dimensions of human connection. Intimacy becomes consumption. People become disposable products. Deep love becomes temporary entertainment. It's a brutal reduction of the richness of human experience to only its most superficial and immediate aspects. Like reducing a complex symphony to just one note repeated infinitely. Parallel to all this, our culture has developed a genuinely pathological obsession with youth and physical beauty. We spend fortunes trying to avoid any sign of aging, as if death were a character flaw instead of a natural part of existence. Huxley understood deeply that accepting our mortality is a fundamental part of human psychological and spiritual maturity. When we deny the reality of death, we also deny the unique preciousness of life. If we had infinite time, nothing would be really important. It's precisely because our existence is limited that each moment, each choice, each relationship has real value. In the world of Brave New World, people automatically took soma whenever they began to have thoughts about aging, dying, or about the deeper meaning of existence. The entire society was meticulously organized to avoid any confrontation with the reality of the human condition. People lived in eternal artificial youth, but paid the terrible price of never growing emotionally or spiritually. This denial of mortality leads us to live as if we had literally infinite time to have fun and procrastinate. We indefinitely postpone important decisions, avoid responsibilities that require maturity, flee from serious commitments that could give real meaning to our lives. We live in an eternal and artificial adolescence, always thinking that later we'll finally become real adults. The modern medical system also perfectly reflects this cultural flight from natural discomfort. Any sadness is immediately diagnosed as depression that needs to be medicated. Any natural anxiety needs chemical medicine. Any emotional discomfort is automatically categorized as pathology that must be eliminated as quickly as possible. Huxley predicted this with frightening accuracy when he created Soma. A society where no form of emotional suffering is tolerated inevitably ends up being a society where no real psychological growth happens. Growth always involves discomfort, just as exercising muscles always involves some kind of effort. Of course, some mental conditions are genuinely pathological and do need proper medical treatment. But there's a crucial difference between clinical depression and normal sadness in the face of real losses, between pathological anxiety disorder and natural nervousness in the face of genuinely challenging or dangerous situations. When we automatically medicate every form of emotional discomfort, we lose precious opportunities to learn from these experiences, to develop natural resilience, to discover internal resources we didn't even know we possessed. Huxley knew this because he himself went through intense periods of depression and anxiety during his life. Instead of desperately fleeing from these difficult feelings, he studied them with scientific and philosophical curiosity. He used his personal experiences of suffering to better understand the universal human condition. This helped him create psychologically more real characters and to clearly perceive the dangers of a society that systematically avoids all types of emotional pain. This constant flight from discomfort also completely destroys our ability to be alone in creative and productive ways. solitude is not the same thing as harmful social isolation. Creative solitude is when we consciously choose to be with ourselves, to reflect, create, think deeply about our life and our place in the world. But nowadays, the exact moment we're alone and in silence, we automatically run to some digital distraction. We progressively lose contact with our own mind, with our inner voice, with our true desires and values. It's precisely in solitude that the great artists, writers, scientists, and thinkers of all eras have always found their best and most original ideas. It's in silence that we can hear our deepest intuition, which is often completely drowned out by the constant noise of the modern world. When we lose the capacity for contemplative solitude, we also lose an essential source of creativity, self-knowledge, and wisdom. Postman perceived that this destruction of the capacity for contemplation was already happening in the 1980s, decades before social media existed. He saw that television was changing not only what people knew about the world, but fundamentally how they thought about any subject. The constant need for entertainment was creating minds that literally could no longer process serious, complex information, or information that required prolonged reflection. The modern world has transformed practically everything into a game or competition. Apps give us virtual points for exercising, for studying, for completing basic daily tasks. Social media gives us likes and hearts as if they were video game prizes. Even work has been transformed into an infinite series of goals, rewards, and rankings. This total gamification of life may seem fun and motivating superficially, but it has a dangerous psychological side. When literally everything becomes a game, nothing is taken truly seriously. Fundamental questions like politics, environment, personal relationships, spiritual development are treated as just another form of entertainment. We completely lose the capacity for deep and committed engagement with the real problems of the world. Everything becomes a reason for temporary fun, but some dimensions of life require seriousness, commitment, and real work. In Huxley's book, there was a popular game called Centrifugal Bumblepuppy, which was purposely complicated and completely meaningless. The real objective of the game wasn't the genuine fun of the participants, but simply to keep people busy and mentally distracted. The more complicated and without true purpose the game was, the better it worked to prevent people from thinking about really important questions about their lives and their society. Today, we have our own psychologically meaningless games. Social media that makes us scroll infinitely through content that adds absolutely nothing meaningful to our life or understanding of the world. Apps that make us click compulsively in search of completely empty rewards. Games that simulate productive work and real achievement, but don't lead to any genuine accomplishment. This lack of seriousness gradually disconnects us from cultural traditions and accumulated wisdom that previous generations developed over thousands of years. Ancient cultures created sophisticated spiritual, philosophical, and social practices that gave structure, meaning, and direction to human life. But when we're constantly addicted to novelty and stimulus, we completely lose interest in this ancestral wisdom. Huxley spent years of his adult life carefully studying these ancient traditions. He read Buddhist, Hindu, Christian mystical texts, Greek philosophers, thinkers from diverse cultures. He realized that all these traditions, despite their superficial differences, agreed on a fundamental truth. Human life needs much more than just hedonic pleasure to have real meaning. It needs transcendent purpose, connection with something greater than the individual ego, genuine spiritual growth. Cultural traditions aren't perfect, and some really need to be questioned, reformed, or even abandoned when they become harmful. But when we indiscriminately throw away all the accumulated wisdom of the past in exchange for instant and superficial pleasures, we lose precious tools for dealing with the eternal challenges of human existence. We become like people who burn down an entire library because they preferred watching television. This constant and compulsive search for pleasure also creates a very subtle form of social conformism. When everyone is simultaneously addicted to the same digital platforms, watching the same viral videos, reacting to the same memes, consuming basically the same entertainment, real diversity of thought and perspective drastically diminishes. We all sincerely think we're unique, different, and original, but we're actually all reacting in very similar ways to the same carefully programmed stimuli. It's an illusion of individuality in a reality of massive uniformity. Modern conformism is psychologically more dangerous than the conformism of traditional dictatorships, precisely because it's completely voluntary. No one physically forces us to use specific social media or watch certain programs. We consciously choose to do this. That's why it's much harder to recognize and resist. How do you fight something you chose freely yourself? Orwell showed this differently in 1984. There, people were physically forced to participate in collective rituals of hatred against the official enemies of the state. Everyone obediently pretended to hate whoever the government told them to hate at that moment. It was forced and obvious conformism. Today, our conformism is infinitely more subtle and therefore more effective. We all voluntarily follow the same digital trends, watch the same videos that everyone is watching, react in predictably similar ways to the same viral events. This voluntary conformism makes us progressively incapable of making real sacrifices for superior ideals or transcendent values. Previous generations were historically capable of giving up personal comfort and immediate pleasure to fight for freedom, justice, truth, human dignity. Today, many people can't even give up 15 minutes of digital entertainment to read a serious book or have a deep conversation with family. The psychological capacity for conscious sacrifice is absolutely essential for any real growth in life. Athletes sacrifice immediate comfort to train disciplinedly. Students sacrifice fun to learn important skills. Parents sacrifice personal time and energy to properly care for their children. But a society culturally addicted to instant pleasure systematically loses this capacity to consciously choose what's important long-term instead of what's immediately gratifying. Postman saw this process happening clearly in the educational system. He perceived that schools were being progressively forced to compete with television and other entertainment for students' attention. To manage to hold children's attention, teachers had to make absolutely everything fun, easy, and quickly gratifying. The inevitable result was that students completely lost the ability to deal with genuinely difficult, boring information or information that required sustained mental effort. Any knowledge that wasn't immediately entertaining was automatically rejected as irrelevant or boring. This leads us to a fascinating and disturbing paradox. The algorithms that control our main digital platforms know our desires, fears, and vulnerabilities better than we know them ourselves. They analyze millions of data points about our behavior and can predict with frightening accuracy what will make us click, what will hold our attention, what will keep us connected longer. These systems manipulate our emotions and impulses much more sophisticatedly and efficiently than any propagandist or manipulator from the past ever managed. And they do this 24 hours a day, every day, with surgical precision. The practical result is that we live in a psychological illusion of free choice. We genuinely think we're autonomously choosing what to watch, what to read, what to buy, how to spend our time. But in reality, these choices are constantly being directed and influenced by systems that study our behavior and offer us exactly what they calculated we'll want at the psychologically ideal moment. It's as if we were rats in a carefully designed maze, thinking we're freely exploring the environment when we're actually just following a predetermined path by researchers who studied our behavior patterns. In Huxley's world, people were literally conditioned from babies to like certain things and automatically reject others. Today, we're conditioned more subtly through algorithms. They learn our personal behavior patterns and progressively show us more of the same type of content. If you watch videos about a certain subject, you'll see more and more similar videos. Your worldview gradually becomes narrower and more limited, but you have the illusion of freely exploring the internet. This manipulation is so subtle and well disguised that we rarely consciously perceive it's happening. Unlike traditional advertising, which was obviously manipulative and direct, modern digital influence perfectly disguises itself as useful personalization, technological convenience, and innocent entertainment. We're psychologically programmed without knowing we're being programmed. Orwell also predicted this type of manipulation, but imagined it would be implemented directly by the totalitarian government. In 1984, the Ministry of Truth constantly changed historical records to serve the political interests of the ruling party. Today, algorithms do something functionally similar. They filter and select the information we receive based on what they calculate we want to hear, creating personalized informational bubbles. Our individual version of reality is carefully personalized and edited, but also systematically distorted. Each person lives in a slightly different version of reality, all equally limited and manipulated. But there is real hope. Huxley didn't write Brave New World to cause us despair or paralysis, but specifically to warn us about dangers we could still avoid. He knew from personal experience that once we clearly understand how psychological mechanisms of control work, we can consciously begin to resist and free ourselves from them. The first step is always developing awareness, honestly recognizing that the problem exists and affects our own life, not just other people's lives. This requires humility and courage because it means admitting that maybe we're not as free and autonomous as we'd like to think. Truly great art and literature have always been powerful forms of resistance against any kind of social manipulation. When we read a really profound book, when we contemplate a genuinely touching work of art, when we listen to music that awakens our soul, we experience something that no algorithm can artificially reproduce. These experiences reconnect us with our authentic and original humanity. Great artists and writers of all eras have always been able to see beyond the superficial appearances of their historical time. They can show hidden truths that are concealed behind social conventions, awaken emotions that were dormant, ask fundamental questions that no one else is courageously asking. That's why totalitarian regimes of all types always systematically persecute genuine artists. They intuitively know that true art is psychologically dangerous for any system that wants to control the masses through manipulation. Huxley was personally a living example of this. He didn't just write theoretically about the dangers of modern society. He consciously lived in a radically different way. He practiced meditation daily, studied philosophy deeply, carefully experimented with altered states of consciousness, always seeking ways to expand human perception beyond the artificial limits imposed by consumer society. Today, more than ever, we desperately need this true art as psychological antidote against the superficial world of constant entertainment and digital manipulation. This doesn't mean that all entertainment is intrinsically bad, but we urgently need to balance quick and easy pleasure with much deeper and genuinely challenging experiences. Postman also saw real education as a fundamental form of cultural resistance. He firmly believed that we could teach people to think much more critically about media, entertainment, and digital manipulation. If we clearly understood how psychological manipulation works, we could consciously defend ourselves from it. But this requires conscious and sustained mental effort. It doesn't happen automatically. The central and final question is, how can we recover our authentic freedom in a society systematically addicted to manipulated pleasure? Huxley developed some practical answers to this question, based on his own spiritual and intellectual journey of decades. The first and most important thing we need to do is develop genuine inner discipline. This definitely doesn't mean becoming a monk or giving up all legitimate pleasures of life. It specifically means learning to consciously choose when we want hedonic pleasure and when we prioritize eudaimonic growth. It means progressively developing the psychological capacity to tolerate discomfort when that discomfort is necessary for our real development. Inner discipline also means patiently learning to be alone in silence without entering despair or anxiety. Reserving specific moments of the day for quietude, deep reflection, direct contact with our deepest thoughts and feelings. These moments are like physical exercise for the mind. The more we consciously practice, the stronger our natural capacity for concentration and contemplation becomes. Another fundamental tool is what Huxley called pure attention, or awareness. Instead of allowing our attention to be constantly pulled and fragmented by external stimuli, we can gradually train our capacity to consciously and sustainably focus on what we choose to focus on. This requires disciplined practice, like any skill, but it's definitely possible to develop. We also urgently need to rediscover the incomparable value of genuinely deep human relationships. Instead of having hundreds of virtual and superficial friends, we can consciously invest time and emotional energy in some truly intimate friendships. Instead of seeking romance through apps that systematically treat people as disposable products, we can patiently cultivate the vulnerability and commitment necessary for real and lasting intimacy. Orwell taught us to carefully distrust any language that tries to deliberately confuse or limit our thinking. Postman taught us to systematically question entertainment that tries to replace our natural capacity for serious reflection. Huxley taught us to consciously resist artificial pleasures that try to replace our fundamental search for meaning and transcendent purpose. Authentic freedom isn't having unrestricted access to 1,000 different forms of instant and superficial pleasure. Real freedom is having the developed capacity to consciously choose how to use our limited time, our precious attention, our one life. It's being genuinely capable of saying no to things that seem superficially attractive but don't take us in the direction of where we really want to go. It's important to recognize that digital technology has brought genuinely revolutionary benefits to humanity. The democratization of access to knowledge is something historically unprecedented. The ability of ordinary people to learn any skill, access art from any culture, connect with other people who share their most specific interests. All of this is genuinely wonderful and liberating. The problem isn't the existence of technology, but our unconscious and addictive relationship with it. When we consciously use these tools for real growth, genuine learning, authentic connection with other human beings, they can tremendously enrich our lives. When we allow them to use us as products to generate profit through manipulation of our impulses, they become instruments of psychological slavery. Pleasure isn't our enemy, but it can easily become our golden prison if we don't learn to use it consciously and in a balanced way. Huxley, Orwell, and Postman showed us different aspects of how an entire society can gradually lose its fundamental freedom. But they also offered us concrete tools to recognize these processes and recover our authentic autonomy. The final choice is genuinely in our hands. Continue being subtly manipulated by systems that profit from our most basic impulses, or develop the consciousness and discipline necessary for a truly free and meaningful life. If this content has awakened important reflections about your own life, check out our exclusive ebook in the first pinned comment. It's a guide that can help you in this process. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more content that can genuinely transform your life perspective and your daily choices.